My name is David Camper. I'm the chair of the American Indian Studies Department, and we're honored and thrilled to have so many of you here tonight for this special annual event that's really become one of my favorite events of the year. It's what we call the Linda Parker Memorial Lecture. And this year we're really excited to have Leah Mata Fragua to chat with us today. But before we do, I want to just take a couple minutes and talk about Linda. You know, it's every year it seems we've got more students that didn't know her. And Margaret, Kate, and I, and a handful of us are happy to be able to carry on and talk about her legacy and talk about how important she was to our department, and really just what a dear friend she was and what a great person. She got her doctorate, a Juris Doctorate, or law degree, and a PhD from University of Oklahoma. And she started at San Diego State in 1986. And she was the department chair from 91 to 2004. And she really held things down for a long time in those years. The department got, through all kinds of budget cuts, the department got a bit thin, but she was amazing, an amazing ability to sort of hold on until others could come and help continue to build it. And Linda was always one of our students' favorites, particularly our majors. She spent such good time with them, particularly the Native students, and you know, not just looking after them, but helping them really think about what they were doing with their education and how to use it. And that's something that I try to continue and pick up on, the way I noticed her do that. And you know, she was so supportive of all faculty too. So we're really glad to be able to always do this and honor her. And I'm particularly glad that this year we have a new faculty member and tribal liaison, Jacob Alvarado Whitehook, and Jacob was a student of Linda's. So I'm thrilled that Jacob is be able to be here and as tribal liaison, give the land acknowledgement and say a few words about Linda if he wants to. And then after Jacob, we'll hand it over to Olivia, who will do the introduction of our guest speaker. So go ahead, Jacob.
Thank you, Camper. How mati bejam, moskana chuhi, mati pai kumiai, nosh most my book, Yapum Kalaspai. My name is Jacob, Anipai from San Pasqual. Our village name is Mokoko. My clan name is White Book, and it means King Snake. It's an honor and privilege to be here tonight and to honor Linda in a good way. She was my professor. The first time I ever took federal Indian law, and I think it was around the first time they were offering it at San Diego State in the fall. And we read this book called In the Courts of the Conquerors by Echo Hawk. And like we know a lot about what happens to our people, you know, but we don't really know how strategically like the United States did it and creating laws and just taking away land, you know. And this is what she was teaching. You know, she was teaching us all like the first court cases, Johnson versus McIntosh, like how they took away everything from us just like in the blink of an eye. And the whole title In the Courts of the Conquerors, it's all based on obviously the conquerors, you know, like it's their will, whatever they want to create, that's what they created to control. And that's where we're at today. And that awareness was brought to me by Dr. Parker, who taught this class. And she always told us, and she always told me, she always wanted me to be a professor within the American Indian Studies. She's like, you gotta come back and teach. You gotta be part of this. Like, we need more natives here. So I guess like it's paying it forward, you know, and just remembering those words in a positive way. But overall, yeah, it was a good experience. You know, she made my experience great at SDSU. She actually she made me feel really welcome there as a native, and she was always representing the Cherokee Nation. You know, where she was from, and telling everyone Cherokee natives this, natives that. So in class, it felt good. You know, her like be rooting and talking about her people, and to have a native professor. You know, and I just appreciate everything she did for me, and it's just cool to see how it all comes back, you know, in circle. And that I'm doing something that she suggested. So it's an honor for me to carry that on. So thank you. And with that being said, at SDSU, we created a land acknowledgement by Connolly from Campo and faculty of the American Indian Studies Department, other elders. What does that look like? What does that mean? Well, it's an indigenous perspective. As Native people, we always wherever we go, like this is something we did. Our parents, grandparents taught us. We always honored the people of the land and prayed for the people of the land. And again, whatever felt on your heart because of the atrocities and the stuff that we have been through as indigenous people. So that's one way why I always did land acknowledgements with like my family. But it was mostly like a prayer and just acknowledging and like a silent thing we did all the time. So with that being said, we stand upon a land that carries the footsteps of millennial Kumeyaay people. There are people whose traditional lifeways intertwine with the worldview of earth and sky and a community of living beings. This land is part of a relationship that has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced the Kumeyaay people to the present day. It is part of a worldview founded in the harmony of the cycles of the sky and the balance and the forces of life. For the Kumeyaay, the red and black represent the balance of those forces that provide for harmony within our bodies as well as the world around us. As students, faculty, staff, and alumni of San Diego State University, we acknowledge this legacy from the Kumeyaay. We promote this balance in life as we pursue our goal of knowledge and understanding. We find inspiration in the Kumeyaay spirit to open our minds and hearts. It is the legacy of the red and black. It is land of Kumeyaay. Yakan, heart is good. Thank you, and I look forward to the presentation. And thanks for everyone for coming and this for this great moment. So thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. So yeah, Linda obviously had a law degree, and so she taught some of our law classes, but and our political classes. And she also taught a lot of our history classes. But one thing also I always appreciated about Linda was her style and her interest in art. She had a lot of really nice indigenous art in her office and often accented what she wore with Native jewelry. And so that was part of the reason why we thought this was perfect for this event. And I really can't think of any more stylish Native person on our campus than Dr. Olivia Chilco. So I will hand it over to Dr. Olivia Chilco to do the rest of the introduction.
Thank you, David. I'm very flattered, but I have my Leah Mata Fragua original earrings on and my Jamie Okuma dress. So had to come with that wearable art going with the theme. But I'm so excited that we're having this event. I applied for funding to do this over a year ago before COVID was ever on our minds. And it was initially planned to go with a class that I also created called Indigenous Women and the Arts that hasn't been taught yet, but will be being taught next spring. So it's too bad that I didn't get to pair with the class, but I am really excited that we're still able to do it and secure the funding for this, and to have Leah as an amazing California Indian artist to share her insights. And just to introduce our guest a little bit about her. She's a member of the Northern Chumash tribe, which is located on the Central California coast. And she's a professor with the Institute of American Indian Arts in the Indigenous Liberal Studies Department. And she also works as a contemporary artist, creating through traditional practices, focused on living forms of regalia and jewelry, while building ongoing traditions in California Indian arts. Her work as a place-based artist is grounded in an understanding of the past that is interdependent with the future and the relationship she has to her homelands. She has many different honors and accolades from places like the Autry, the Heard Museum, Santa Fe Indian Market, and she was also awarded the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship and was selected as a Master Artist recipient for the Alliance of California Traditional Arts. And right now is currently a fellow at the School for Advanced Research, I believe. Yes. we are just so excited to hear what she is going to be talking about this evening, and she'll present for a little bit. And then we also have some interview questions for her, and then we'll be able to open it up to our audience if they have any questions as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Leah.
All right, thank you, Olivia. And thank you everybody for thinking of me and the work that I do. I had shared the flyer and one of my friends replied on social media, that title's a mouthful. and it is if you're looking through it through like a Western lens. Right? Because each one of those are like a separate thing, but in Indigenous worldview, they're all interconnected and all interrelated. So it depends on how you're viewing the title. Because, you know, the way that I work is I take kind of the older works or older ideas about fashion and wearable art and just kind of move them forward. And so I have a few slides that I wanted to show. So let me see, can I share my screen here? Let's see. Oh, someone's gotta give me permission to share.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. I gave you I made you co-host. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, let me. Okay, so yes, we're going to talk about the intersection of fashion, academia, the environment, e-commerce, all that. And again, that seems like a mouthful, but when it comes to Indigenous art, it's all interconnected. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that early on, like people think that fashion is a new concept for Indigenous people or it's a contemporary idea, but in a lot of my early research, especially with the Harrington notes, one of the things that, you know, my great-great-grandma had mentioned to Harrington was that women went out of their way to make their daughters' dresses fabulous. And so I kind of think that nothing has changed, right? I mean, a lot of times we buy or make things for our children with kind of the idea that we want them to feel good in what they're wearing and to look good in what they're wearing, to represent their community. And so really, even though, you know, we progress, that concept, I think, is still with us today. It's not something that's foreign to our communities. And I remember in another note, she mentioned when the San Ynez Chumash came up to our dances, that all the women there were just dressed so well and their regalia was so nice. And that was kind of like the band that had the best dressers or the best dance riggins. And so, you know, I don't think anything has changed really. The materials have changed and the way that we wear clothing has changed, but a lot of the concepts are still there. And when I do fashion shows, I tend to put in contemporary and older or pre-contact pieces in. So this is a fashion show just recently in San Francisco. And here's another one. When I do contemporary fashion, part of what I do is I upcycle or I use deconstruction. So nothing I make is from something new. The garment industry or the fashion industry can be have extreme impacts on the environment. And so just to kind of not participate in that or not participate in overconsumption, a lot of times I'll find pieces and upcycle or deconstruct and reconstruct pieces. So here's an example of that. This was actually a maxi skirt And I put it into a jumper. I wish you could see the bottom because the legs are really cute. And then I just used a bark skirt, one of our willow skirts, and put it on as a vest. So kind of using materials from all different decades and time periods and putting them together. Here's one of those this was a fast fashion outfit. Again, it was, I don't know, H&M or something, but it was really, it was hideous. It had like these weird long sleeves with slits down them, and the legs were really long and flared. So I kind of altered it and redid it. And then again, used California Indian jewelry to accessorize the look. And, you know, one thing about fast fashion, and this is not to call any Indigenous artists out or to shame anybody. These are just kind of questions that I think of. And so I don't have the answers to them half the time. They're just things that keep me up at night. So I always kind of throw them out there to community to see, you know, where do other people sit on this? Because I think that it's really hard to make decisions for community by yourself, right? Because then you have issues of authority. So one of the questions I always ask myself is, should we be questioning in terms of both sustainability and ethical business practice Indigenous designers? And that's a really touchy question, because some Indigenous designers have fast fashion practices. And is that something that relates or correlates to our values? So just something to think about, not calling anyone out, just everybody has their own journey with their art. And, you know, in the beginning, I did not use ethical beads. And now I've researched and sourced both sustainable and ethical businesses. I pay a lot for the beads I use, but it really makes a difference for me in the business practice of the vendors I might use. Oops, hit the wrong thing here. So, and I recognize not everybody can afford ethical fashion, and there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. So that's why I always try and use as little as I can, or work with things or items or garments that are already existing. So this was another one. This was actually a long sleeve, like velour 70s thing. So I made it into a crop top and cut the sleeves off, added some, I just skirt and I did a beaded belt, some earrings. And so, you know, again, fashion doesn't always have to be fast fashion. If you can't afford some higher quality ethical brands, upcycling or deconstruction and reconstruction are great options. And the reason I also talk about, I'm going to move you guys over here. I got you guys all lined up on my words here. So 80% of garment workers are women, and most are working in poor countries for poverty pay. Even here in the US, Native women who work in the arts can be severely underpaid. I've seen people on some social media groups, you know, someone posts a ribbon skirt and someone says, wow, that's too expensive, or that's a lot of money. So we do that to our own people. And it's funny because sometimes those same people will go to the mall and, you know, do one of those new things that young people do, the clothing hauls, the haul thing. It's like a new, or maybe it's not new, maybe I'm just old and just kind of getting up to date on it. I don't know, but fashion hauls where they, you know, buy all the stuff and then they show it on social media, whether it's TikTok, you know, their fashion hauls. And, you know, we do that to our own people. We nickel and dime them. Oftentimes women artists, even in Indian country, are paid less than or can charge less than their male counterparts. So I think it's important when we think about fashion, how it impacts women as well. Hold on, I got to move you guys over so I can get to my. And what you want to do, like for me, I usually look for, if I don't buy used, or I don't wear someone's hand-me-downs, I look for companies that are OTEX certified, meaning that they are free from chemicals in all stage of productions. And I look for companies, again, that are ethical in their business practices. This picture, sorry, it's not clear. It was from an opening. That's why there's a drink there. I forgot to photograph this dress here before I had sent it to the Autry. So this is the only photograph I have until the Autry puts it on display. But so this particular dress is made with all things that I found in my normal gathering spots. So normally I gather in my homeland the materials for my dance dresses, but on this particular day, all I could find was trash. So I literally gathered, these are straws and plastic bottles. The skirt is twined with plastic bags. So these are all Safeway bags and all kinds of Walmart bags and whatnot. So the front apron, and instead of using the red ochre on the bottom of my skirts, I used the oil. So this was kind of to show or illustrate the damage that's happening in our waters and in places where we gather a lot of our materials. And so the one thing I want to ask everybody, and you don't have to answer it, this is not something people can answer, but you know, again, should we hold Indigenous designers to the same threshold? And it's a sticky question because some designers, they print, and I know this is probably going to get me in trouble, a lot of people, but some designers, they manufacture and print garments in other countries. And, you know, for me, that's just not an option, but that might be for other people. And I don't know, it's something I guess that everybody has to ask themselves, you know, when you do shop, do you hold Indigenous designers accountable as we hold larger corporations or other companies we might be purchasing from? And one of the things that I do when I research companies or garment companies or even suppliers of materials is I also look for companies that recycle their water and are certified for labor rights. And that's hard to do because it really limits you. But it's just something for myself, and I'm not perfect. This is, I didn't, you know, I wasn't born this way. I had to, you know, figure this kind of stuff out just for myself on where I stand. This is just a picture of a bark skirt. And this will be used for a couple exhibits that are coming up that I can't share, but this will be part of it. So this is a bark skirt. The water on the bark skirt, or the blue on the bark skirt, is to represent the ocean rising levels. And so this will be part of a full project. And I'm collaborating with someone else. So we'll be working on this, and people will be able to view it shortly. And it's just another kind of work that I do to visually transport people, not only to my homeland and the resources we use, but just also to draw them into the discussion about climate change or the climate emergency that we're all facing. So one of the things that I've had to do as an artist, again, I started out doing our pre-contact dance dresses, and then kind of evolved from there. One thing I think in California, which I don't see here in my husband's community or out here in Santa Fe in New Mexico, in California, we tend to, the art that we tend to do a lot of reproduction work, or work that I guess would be labeled or classified as primitive or pre-contact stuff. And so we don't do as much fine art as communities out here. And I see the progression of art here in New Mexico more so than I do in my homelands. And so, you know, once resources became more difficult, and I didn't want to, you know, keep extracting resources, I started to pivot. This is one of the dolls that I'm doing now. So instead of doing full-size dance dresses and fashion, I'm doing them on dolls. So this helps me utilize all the small scrap materials that I wasn't able to use from larger pieces. So now I'm able to use like literally every scrap. And so these are new works that are based on material scraps. And it's hard for Indigenous artists to pivot. And the reason it's hard for us to pivot, I'm going to go back. The reason it's hard for us to pivot is because a lot of times, and I've heard this, well, that's not traditional. Why are you doing that? So sometimes our community can be harsh on us. And so I want you to think about, you know, there is a time where many of the resources we use for our pre-contact or more traditional material culture are not going to be accessible. And so how do we then replace or continue to move forward in artistic expression if those items aren't available? And does it make anything less traditional or less native art if they're made with different materials? And that goes for fashion as well. So one of the things for me that has been a big issue is the abalone. So there's a moratorium on it. I haven't been able, which is primarily my main medium. But a lot of the resources I use are endangered or completely inaccessible. And so for those of you who follow kind of the abalone stories, it was, you know, red abalone was extremely prevalent at one time in California, and then it was overfished. And so there were moratoriums kind of starting in Southern California and moved their way up. And then most recently, the only place you could gather or harvest abalone was above like Bodega Bay and above, like above. And so now there's a moratorium even for all abalone harvesting, just because of the mass die-off of abalone. And one of the reasons, and it's a chain reaction, so one of the reasons why we don't have the abalone is because the purple sea urchins are devouring our kelp beds. And so the kelp beds are what the abalone feed off of too, and they need those for their own health. So one of the things that I did, and these are up and coming, these are still just kind of in raw form, but these are purple sea urchin spikes. And then I gold leaf them, and then I'll cap them. And so those will eventually be earrings. So just trying to use the predator or and it wasn't a predator before, I hate to use that word, but it's just taking advantage of the opportunities that have been presented. So, I mean, that's what species do, right? So this particular item is unique in that the purple sea urchins who are destroying the kelp beds through no fault of their own, we've made that climate for them. The purple sea urchins, natural predators, the starfish, a lot of them have wasting syndrome, and so that's why there's an overpopulation of purple sea urchins, and so they're devouring the kelp beds, and so it's this whole chain reaction. So people were thinking, well, what can we use the purple sea urchins for? There's so many, you know, what are we going to use them for? And I was like, oh, I got an idea. So this is my idea, to use those resources that are in abundant. And so a lot of times it takes the idea of shifting or pivoting, and to keep moving forward. And I think that's one thing that Indigenous people are really good at, is being inventive and being resilient and being able to find sustainable options, as we, you know, move forward in our societies. But here's some questions before I hand it over to the interview. So again, how do we pivot when our resources are no longer available or endangered? And also, how can we allow for artists to explore new mediums without negative impacts from community? And again, I talk about that too. I brought that up. You know, sometimes I might use a different material because I want to save maybe some abalone for my community, right? For our own dances. And so I might use something in place or something different. And there'll always be someone that has to say, well, that's not traditional. And you're right, it's not, but I need to save those traditional materials for my community. So this is what I'm able to produce. And so just being flexible, as artists need to change materials. Out here, they're having the same issues, a lot of jewelers, with turquoise and coral and other kinds of raw materials. So eventually, you know, jewelers in the Southwest will have to think about how they're going to pivot and how clients or customers will accept those new mediums that they're using. Also, how can academia help Indigenous artists? For me, what helped me was, as an artist, and I didn't go to school for art. So my art training came from community and family. And I always had wanted to see collections so I could get a better grasp of how we made things or how things were done. But if you're non-academic, it's really hard to navigate collections or museums. It's a whole different language. It's a whole different way of interacting. And so a lot of times those can be barriers for community members who may not know how to access collections. I didn't even know there was collections I could access back, you know, in my younger days, before school. I just thought that that was only for, you know, academia, and that they had access and there were gatekeepers, and that was it. It wasn't until I went to the Smithsonian, and I got to look at all of our stuff, and I was just thinking, wow, how many of our community members don't know that all of this is here and that they can access it. So that was helpful for me as my undergrad is in anthropology, and I only majored in it because I thought that was the only way I could access collections. I wasn't really interested in the field, but and I didn't want it as a career choice, but I really thought that was the only way I could access collections, and it did help me. So be mindful of that. Like, how can you help Indigenous communities access collection and allow them to, or break down those barriers, because it is intimidating if you're not in academia to, you know, cold call a school and ask, you know, to view their collections. The other question I want to leave you with is, how do we as community help support and shape Indigenous designers? If we are, as community, going to hold our Indigenous designers accountable to the same accountability as non-Indigenous designers in terms of ethics and sustainabilities in their projects, how do we then help shape that? Do we buy the products? Do we call them out? Do we privately say, hey, how are your garments made? You know, those are all questions I think that are important. And lastly, I want to leave you guys with one of the things that I always struggled with is, what is the line and how does intent and protocol come into play? A lot of things in our communities are not shareable outside of our communities. And so where is that line, and define that line in your community? What are your elders in your community okay with you sharing? And how much of that can you put in your designs? And how do you navigate those protocols? Because there's always issues of authority somehow that get involved and fights break out, right? And so just kind of knowing where that line is and how to navigate that within your tribal protocols and the intent. So when I make something that's for sale outside of my community, I'm not using designs or things that were meant only for my community. So I have a line, I have things that I do in private for my community. If I'm making a dress for someone to dance in, I don't post it on social media. But if I'm making something, a dress for a photo shoot, then that's a different intent. And I'm making it and going into the process with that intent. If I'm doing something, again, for my community, I might have to do it on a certain day, or I can't do it this day, or I can't do it at this time, or I have to do this and this before I do it, which is very different intent than if I'm making it for public use or education. And so I flip back and forth between those worlds. And I think for anybody going into, or any person going into art or fashion designing, is to think about that ahead of time, and how you engage and ask elders and people in your community for permission, and kind of accepting where that line is. So those are just, nobody has to answer these right now. Those are just kind of things that keep me up at night. This is really what I think of every night before I go to bed, and it drives me crazy that I overthink everything, but that's just how my brain works. And so, for me, it's been like I said, a journey and a process to get to where I am, and it's not without pitfalls. So I'm always available. So if people want to follow me on social media, it's usually the best way to ask me a question. You may not have a question now, but you might have one later. So feel free to add me. I'm on Instagram, and yes, I'm old, so I'm on Facebook, and I'm also on TikTok though, guys. So I'm learning all this new stuff. So if you want to follow me and later ask questions or engage in dialogue, I'm always happy to do so. Because I think a lot of these questions can't be answered by an individual. They need to come from community.
Thank you so much, Leah. That was amazing. And I think what way we'll do it is, I think people have a lot of questions, so I think we'll just turn it over to the audience, and then Dr. Chilcote and I can jump in. Dr. Chilcote just did what I was hoping to do, and she's quicker than me. Thank God she put your Instagram handle in the chat. So if anyone wants to look at that, and why don't we? Do you want to
I gotta
stop sharing?
Yeah.
Great. So we'll open it up now. If you can use the little hand raising function, or if you prefer to write a question in the chat, I'll keep eye in the chat and go ahead and answer for you. But Anna, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. It's a wonderful presentation, and I really like the idea of using deconstruction in the fashion. I think that's amazing. My question will be in regards to your community. You mentioned that you have to know the line. In your experience, did you encounter like real struggles for your fashion not being accepted by your community? And if so, what did you do?
No, for me, like many California Indian communities, there's not many of us in our band. So we're a small community and we're all related. So it's not like someone didn't know me. We all know each other. And so I think that I had walked carefully enough to earn the trust of my community. And it's not always fun. It's not always easy. One time I wanted to do a dress that was from a different band, from the San Ynez band. And I literally made an appointment with their elders council and waited 4 months to get on the agenda. Mind you, I really want to make this dress, but I waited 4 months to make sure it was okay. And I went to San Ynez and I presented why I wanted to make it, all of what it would be used for, everything. And they were like, great, okay, go for it. So I hadn't had any bad experience for myself, but I have seen that happen, especially in linguistics, like in the linguistic world, and language revitalization, a lot of issues of authority about who's authorized to make, these decisions and who's authorized to make these calls. And that gets really sticky in communities. And so I just kind of figured out where the line is. No one really tells you where that line is, but you do kind of figure it out through looks or gossip or whatever. In my husband's communities, when they have art shows, they actually have someone patrol the art booths. And if there's something that crosses the line, they make you take it down. So I've seen negative experiences through other artists, but I haven't myself. But I believe that's because I had good teachers in my life that taught me protocol. And I'm not perfect. I mean, I'll mess up, of course. But and the hard part is that art often conflicts with traditional values. If my mom saw how much I have to brag on Facebook and IG about my art, I would be scolded. I would really be scolded. But I can't make it as an artist if I don't promote. And so there's these conflicts. And so that also, I think more traditional communities or communities that don't have a lot of artists struggle with that issue.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Dr. Murdoch.
Hi, Leah. Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it, and I thought there was just so many generative and fruitful things that you're talking about. My question is, it's about community, but it's perhaps maybe a little bit different in terms of how I'm thinking about it, because a lot of your practices and your sourcing and your concerns with labor just reminds me of sort of how precarious labor, especially in the fine art world, is. And it seems like you're doing that work of building community in terms of thinking about how art is a communal process in terms of your materials, your sources, and also the people who are also involved in the making that goes into the final product. So I just wanted to ask you, or give you an opportunity maybe to say a little bit more about how you imagine like the community of people that are related to the art that you make.
That's a good question. And actually that's another one I talk about with everybody who will talk to me about it. I'm sure I drive a lot of Chumash community members crazy with all my, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? But yeah, for me, I tend to think about, like, when I think about art from here, from my husband's community, right? They're Pueblo. They have a unique look. Like you can tell pottery from a Pueblo. You can tell artwork from the plains. You can tell artwork from Pacific Northwest. But what is Chumash art like? Who the hell knows what that looks like? And so for me, I really want to have California Indian tribes that don't have a strong art component to really develop their own vernacular, something from their own community that is theirs. And so when you see that, you're like, oh, that's Tamba, or that's Chumash, or that's Kumeyaay, or that's, I mean, when I see a bird gourd, right, I know where that's from. I might not know who the artist is, but at least I know where that's from and what it's used for. And so I just would like to see communities that don't have strong vernacular, develop that as a community, and that has to come from community. I can't just say, this is what our art looks like. Everybody in my community makes this. You can't do that. We collectively have to come together and work on what that vernacular looks like. And a lot of communities in California, I would say more Northern California has better visibility in the arts than Southern California. Of course, the impacts and the mission system have play a huge role in why that is. But definitely there are some pockets in more Central and Northern California that have a stronger vernacular. So I can say, oh yeah, that basket's from this area, or that basket's from this area. And that happens less so in Southern California, at least in my experience.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Field.
Hi, Leah. Thank you for a very interesting talk. Oh, my question is kind of lengthy. I hope it doesn't. I'm going to talk more than you, I think. I work in Baja California. I'm a linguist, and I work on Kumeyaay. And there's a community down there that when we first started working about 12 years ago, me and another linguist, documenting the various varieties of Kumeyaay, in Santa Catarina, who traditionally produce a lot of pottery. They are bilingual, they're trilingual now. They speak Pai Pai and another language called Coalth, which we thought was a dialect of Kumeyaay. And then we realized, oh no, it's a completely distinct language. Well, I've been working with a woman from down there who's a potter. And she is a traditional artist who refuses to do anything different from the traditional way, but she makes her pots the old-fashioned way, and she's also super, super busy. So she produces a lot. You go to the stores around here in San Diego and you find it will often be labeled Kumeyaay pottery, but it's actually Coalth or Pai Pai pottery. And she doesn't burnish it. She doesn't paint it. She refuses to paint it. And I've shown her lots and lots of pictures of pottery from New Mexico, Pueblo pottery, and been like, you know, this pot sells for $300. Your pot sells for $30 here at the museum. The Mission Trails Park is where I often bring some of her art when I have a whole bunch. I buy them piece by piece and I take them over there and sell them, and then I start all over again. And I can't get her to change. And so I just am remarking on what you said about how in Santa Fe, also I should say I'm from Santa Fe. So I go there a lot. My family lives there. And so I know what Pueblo pottery looks like and what it's worth. And I have brought pieces of her art, which is absolutely symmetrically perfect, right? She doesn't use a wheel. She uses paddle and anvil. Mm-hmm. It's all absolutely made from coils and lots of it. And I brought I brought this one giant pot one time that I think I bought for like $100. Which I, maybe up here would be lucky to get $80 for here in San Diego. And I brought it to various galleries in Santa Fe. And they said, no, you got to tell her she's got to burnish it or she's got to paint it. Well, how do you feel about that? What do you think the value is? And finally, I'm at my question of art from artists who refuse to do it in the most, the way that consumers want. She's really a purist. In fact, she just produced, someone showed me the other day, some pieces that were burnished because a customer asked her to do it and promised to pay her extra because it's in several hours more to burnish the pottery, to bring out the micaceous shine. Well, what do you think galleries should do? Galleries that consider themselves really art galleries right there in Santa Fe. We turn their noses up at art. And part of the story also here is this is an Indigenous woman who lives right over the border. There are also Kumeyaay communities down there. Nobody's producing pottery, I don't think. It's mostly basketry from Kumeyaay communities. But sticking to really being sticklers, doing it the old-fashioned way. What's your opinion about that? Should that be worth 1/10 of the art?
Yeah, not in my eyes.
It's just painted.
Yeah, not in my eyes. I mean, and this is where I talked about, most even in the fashion industry, but artists in other countries, it's usually women, and they're usually not paid what their American counterparts are. And so it's incredibly exploitive. And yeah, that goes for art in south of the border as well. And personally, my personal experience is to reframe it and repackage it as rare, traditional, lost art form. I mean, whatever those buzzwords might be, but I would never force an elder to change what works for them or what they want to do. And so that in itself makes it rare. It makes it yeah, it's rare. And so it makes it, you know, I would just reframe it in the way that it's the reframe the narrative. And unfortunately, there is a stigma here, even with other Indigenous communities and gallery owners that work from, you know, other countries, doesn't hold the same value, which, you know, to me, Indigenous women, doesn't matter where they're from, if they're Indigenous women, they should be paid the value of their work. And unfortunately, that in the fashion industry or in arts, that just doesn't happen. Even women here, I know jeweler women that, you know, don't make as much as their male counterparts. I mean, that's just part of our society right now, and it's unfortunate. But I would, yeah, repackage it and reframe that narrative that this is going to be a lost art. People are all jumping on the bandwagon to do the fancy stuff. And here's someone that's sticking to tradition, and this will not be around any longer because nobody wants to do that type of work. Good for her.
It's so hard.
She's
laboring. She's actually digging the soil to make her own clay, right? And firing it with a gavi.
And I find that for me too, like a lot of people don't understand the difference between abalone that I cut and work from, you know, large shell versus there's a lot of abalone that comes from China that is manufactured through illegal poaching, right? So when people buy, and I see a lot of California Indians doing it, and it's no shame, not everybody can buy the equipment, right? So it's kind of a privilege to have the equipment I have. Long story short, I was a single mom of 4 kids for a long time. I was on TANF. And the only reason I was able to get my equipment and afford it was through a TANF program that helped me set up my business. And so, you know, I was very lucky that I was able to have those tools acquired through TANF because it's expensive. Art is expensive. It's very expensive, and it can be a privilege to have those tools. And a lot of times people don't have access to them. So I understand not everybody can grind their own abalone and make it, but a lot of the places that they're getting abalone from are from companies that poach illegally abalone, and then they use the shells. A lot of times they're not even abalone, they're another shell that's dyed to look like abalone with lead and toxic chemicals. And, you know, that just isn't an option for me. I'd rather, like I said, find a new medium than resort to buying abalone processed in that way. And that's, again, an individual, but then it's hard because I'll be at a show and someone who bought abalone from China is selling it at, you know, hundreds of dollars cheaper versus mine, right? And, you know, mine takes me like, you know, 10 hours to make a necklace. And it's backbreaking work to work with these machines and to grind them and to, I mean, it's backbreaking work. It's really challenging work. Ask any basket weaver, it's challenging to go out there and dig for roots. I mean, it's hard work. It's hard work. And I don't think that people understand because our society is so used to cheaper products, cheap labor, overconsumption. And so they don't really value a lot of times more traditional art forms, and they don't know the work that goes into it. And what I've started doing is doing videos, which also helped people understand the labor intensive work and how connected to place that work is. That tends to help. So, and I know that not everybody has access to even internet. I literally struggle for internet. I'm hotspotting on my phone because I don't have internet where I live. So yeah, it's a challenge, but that also helps. Videos and education brochures, all of that kind of stuff, and just reframe it.
Thank you very, very much.
I think Dr. Chocolate has a question.
Yeah, so you kind of briefly talked about or alluded to it in your presentation and some of your remarks, but I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about what's been your personal experience as a Native woman in the art and fashion world.
It's funny, I did not, when I was younger, I was, my family was okay, we weren't rich. So my parents, we had 6 kids actually. And we shopped secondhand. And so in junior high, I took sewing courses because I wanted to alter things to make them look in style. Literally, my mom was one of those people that bought shorts at Kmart and embroidered OP on the shorts so we could, look like we belonged, or, just, junior high stuff. Like, I can't go to school in Kmart stuff. But she would embroider OP. And so I learned from my mom, that about altering and making things. And so in junior high, I started doing that. And then in high school, a lot of my friends were in bands. So I started, pegging their jeans or adding studs to their jackets and just kind of working in that way. And then I was gung-ho, I was going to be a fashion designer. And my parents were like, no, we will not help you. Well, we're not helping you anyway. You got to find your own way, but we're not going to be supportive of art stuff because my dad had come from a family of artists. We're not doing that. You need a real job. And so I abandoned my dreams of being a fashion designer. But then I was like, well, I can make traditional dresses. That's still fashion, right? So, and I didn't get any throwback from my mom. My mom's a Native, my dad's not. But my mom was supportive of that, right? Because it was traditional. And I kind of have a problem with that word anyway, but we'll just use it for tonight. But she was supportive of that type of work, right? And then I kind of wanted to go back into it. But there's people that do it way better than I do. And I am not patient in indoor work. I like to be outside. So I really need to have a lot of my work be interactive with the environment, or just being outside, or being in, I guess, less feminine spaces, right? So if you come to our studio, you'll see power tools. It's messy, it's dirty, it's not a pristine place. And those are the environments I feel most comfortable in. And so fashion wasn't something I had then wanted to pursue because it just didn't fit what I wanted to do. And then occasionally I started getting asked to do fashion shows, and I was thinking, well, I can't just go there with like traditional dresses. I need something more contemporary. And so I was trying to struggle with my need to not consume so much, or to reduce my carbon footprint. And so I just kind of resorted back to what I did in junior high and high school, and that was just kind of upcycle or deconstruct and reconstruct garments. And so that's kind of how I view fashion. It's not for everybody. I love our Indigenous fashion designers, and I think that they do a much better job than I do. So I just kind of work the way that, I don't know, is comfortable for my own ethics. Oh, is the word?
There's a question.
Yeah.
About, will you explain what you mean, or your feelings with the word traditional?
Yeah. So also, as someone who my undergrad was in anthropology. My graduate work was in cultural sustainability, much better program. But anyway, so the anthropology, one of the things that, bothered me was when people say traditional, it's like, well, what, traditional, like 100 feet down or 200 feet down or 50 feet down? Because jewelry from this level looks very different from jewelry that you find at this level, right? Because we're not stagnant, like we progress. And there's kind of this, non-natives kind of romanticize indigenous people to kind of stick within their box, or that those, romanticized frameworks. And, it bothered me because, and when people say, well, that's not traditional. Okay, well, what? That's not traditional for 1850, 1565, 2010? Like where is that timeline? Where does traditional start? And when we make new traditions, because our mediums, let's say, no longer are available, one of the things I've been doing is working with old CDs in lieu of abalone. And I'm coming out with a line that will use old CDs because there's a billion of them. I mean, that's a resource that's completely plentiful. It has a sparkle of abalone. Yes, it's plastic, but it's available. And, I might put it on a dress, and 300 years from now, someone might say, if they're going back to using abalone, that's not traditional. We're supposed to be having CDs on them. So I guess it's weird to have a timeline that doesn't really define anything. So I hate to use that word, but, and I literally text my colleagues and I'm like, what can we use? Somebody tell me another word. Can I use this? How about this? I bug everybody and everybody's like, yeah, that's fine. Use that, whatever. Stop bugging me. But, so some of the things that I've come up with is like place-based art. Those are terms I kind of came up with, or generational work, generational art. I don't know if someone has a better idea, throw it out there, but it just.
I was gonna say, I struggle with the same thing. I'm working on, I work with skateboard artists, indigenous skateboard artists, and I've been trying to use the word conventional, which isn't great, but it doesn't have the same history, doesn't have the same settler history, right? Of like defining, but you're so right. It's so hard to like capture the dynamism, and the word traditional seems so easy, but it doesn't really capture what you're talking about.
No, it doesn't. It's really hard. So that's why I struggle with it. And I'm always open to, like, if someone has a better word, great. Let's see, do we have more questions?
Oh, Linda, please.
I have to get off. I'm trying to oh, hi.
There you go.
Yeah. Excellent presentation. I have a really kind of different question regarding people who are multi-tribal, meaning there are 2 or 3 tribes, like you probably know Jamie Okuma, for example, who is an artist she's Luiseño and Shoshone Bannock, and she does a lot of crossover between her tribe and other tribes where she's enrolled or not enrolled. And so I had a question about your thoughts on that. And then I was curious if there was an organization that a group, American Indian artists women, have that they interact with each other, because I really don't know if there is. I know a lot of Indian women artists, but I didn't know that if there was any kind of organization or something like that.
I don't know of any, and maybe there has been some that have existed in the past or exist. I'm not really good socially, so I kind of miss the loop when there's organizations, and I get all my acronyms confused. I'm like, wait, what are we? My cousin will call me and she's like, Leah, we have the CCC-IC meeting, and I'm like, what one was that? I don't know, but yeah, I kind of work in a bubble, so there may be. And maybe there was. I know that up north, they do a Native Women's Collective in Northern California, which I think is a great model. So I have seen some collectives, And, my dream would always be to start something like that, California, similar to SIBA, but more for fine arts. But it's difficult to do things statewide in California because tribes have different protocols, and we have so many tribal communities with different protocols and different levels of colonization. So we have different levels of language retention and different levels of material culture retention. And so sometimes those can conflict with tribes. So if there was to be one, it would disband because we all fight eventually. But I hate to say that, but it's so hard.
No, I understand.
So
Now, what about
hard.
the crossover between different tribes, a person who is more than one tribe, and their artwork is reflective of all the tribes that they're in? Because I've heard people say to a couple of people I know that are, Salish and, Sioux, for example, and they'll make something that has, it looks like a little bit of both, and people will say to them, why are you making that? Like you said, this doesn't reflect us, our culture. People aren't going to want that. But there's so many people, native people today, tribal people that are mixed, I have a lot of my grandchildren they're Cheyenne, Luiseño, and Lumbee. They're really mixed. So, so I'm just curious about what your thoughts are on when they bring in medias from all of the different tribes.
My kids are also mixed with different tribes. And, for me, I'm, my dad's German, my mom's Native. So I only contend with one tribe, which is pretty easy. I don't know what it would be like to be someone from a multiple tribal community, but my thought would be, your artistic expression is your story, it's your journey. And, not everybody loves the same music, right? Not everybody loves the same paintings. It's different for everybody what calls them. And, for me, if I'm of those tribes, then personally, I feel comfortable working with those mediums or with those design elements or vernaculars. And I would feel comfortable mixing them because that is an expression of who I am. But then you will get those people that will say, that's not traditional. Why are you doing that? And, art is really different than a lot of other, a lot of other worlds, I guess. And so sometimes, non-artists don't understand looking through material culture through an artistic lens. And so that can be a tricky thing to navigate. I wouldn't do someone else's tribe though, that's for sure. I wouldn't do ledger art because that's not where I'm from. That's not something we did. So I wouldn't do something that wasn't from my community, but my kids struggle with that too. For my kids, they keep them really separate. They like to keep it separate. But I've seen people from multiple tribes blend things, and if that's their story, if that's their expression, if they're talking about that struggle of being multiple tribes and it comes out in their work, then I think that's great. I think that's a great narrative.
Thank you.
Leah, I really appreciate the amount of intellectual work that you put into your work, and not just sort of physical work, which of course is important too, and particularly, I guess maybe what you might call ethical work. Could you suggest for some of us resources or how to go about when we choose jewelry or anything else, or like think about some of these companies, how we might think about it more ethically? What are some resources that we might use?
Okay, does anybody need a senior or graduate thesis project? Because this is it, right? This is the project. But yeah, it's hard, and that's what makes it so hard for even artists to find ethical vendors. It's really hard. Capitalism does not make it easy. They don't want you to know things like some of these online fashion companies, they'll use words like limited production or, all these kind of buzz green words. But when you look into their business practices, they're not at all. Or they'll go through like 10 different labels. So it makes it seem like they're not the same company when they're really doing greenwashing. Thank you. So that happens a lot. And I wish there was a place like you're talking about, because it's time consuming to do that amount of research into a vendor that you might use. Like for my beads, it took me a long time to find one. And now I wish I could go back and grab every piece I made prior to that company and take it back and redo them, because it bothers me that they're out there. But I didn't know at the time, I just bought beads at my local bead store, and then it came with a lead warning. And then I was like, what do you mean a lead warning? And I started looking into things and went down this rabbit hole about how beads are made, and it's scary. So yeah, I wish there was a resource. I'm sure a lot of artists would use it. Where do you get your paints from? Paints, I mean, a lot of products that are used to make art or wearable art, fashion, are extremely harsh on the environment. And I wish there was one like website you could go to. If someone knows of one, maybe there is one. Like I said, I live in a bubble, so there might be one, and it's not on my radar. But if there isn't one, I'm telling you, senior project or thesis project, it's an excellent project.
Thank you. We probably have time for one more question, folks. So does anyone else have any other questions? Or
Jess has a question.
Yeah,
David, in the chat.
There's some on the chat.
Oh, Jess, yeah. Jess, do you want to say it? Or do you want me to read it for you? All right, I'll read it for you, Jess. So she's asking about your opinion on why native art that might cross different native nations is criticized more than artists appropriating culture in general. And I think by that she means like, non-native artists engaging in native artwork.
Yeah, well, there is actually a law. So there's the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, and hopefully you learn that in your native law class. So technically it's illegal for someone to market something as indigenous made if they aren't indigenous. So that kind of plays a little role in it. But I think we are our own worst critics, and we are sometimes harder on our own communities than we are on outsiders. And so it's, I guess it's the nature of or a symptom of colonization. Before, we used to have protocols to kind of work out these discrepancies, or we had protocols to prevent us from these types of discrepancies, and a lot of that has been dismantled. And so we're trying to navigate protocols. What might be okay in my community is not okay or taboo in your community. And so I might be saying, hey, I'm making this, and someone in your community might say, well, we don't, that's taboo, or that's not okay. And so that can play a role in it as well. But in my class, in my traditional arts and ecology class, the question that comes up a lot is native appropriation. So other indigenous people using other indigenous people's work, right? Because I talked about some of the work in larger tribal communities, their vernacular is more recognized. And so someone from a smaller community might want to use those designs or elements because it's more well-known and their work will sell better. And so that I get a lot of kind of trying to unpack that in my classes. is it okay to, use a neighboring tribe's designs, or is it okay, for me to, take on, I don't know, silversmithing, which isn't, from my community, but could I do so and then, indigenize it California style? Is that okay? And so those are kind of discussions that we have in some of my courses. And I don't have the answer to it, it's one of those things again where I think that community has to come together and figure those kinds of questions out. I mean, I wish I could answer it. But yeah, it's difficult to navigate art. It really is. I remember I did a project with Kara. It was for her American Doll series, and we did a California Indian girl in the picture, and we used a basket design from a community, and she had posted on social media, and somebody said, "Why are you appropriating Hawaiian design?" I was like, wait, well, some of our communities have similar or same designs, so sometimes I have to remind people of that as well. So sometimes there can be crossovers in designs. A lot of indigenous communities throughout the world use similar vernacular, just use it differently. And so that can also play into kind of this criticizing within our communities a little more so than we do outside our communities.
Thank you so much for that, Leah. I feel like I can speak for everyone when I say that, I've learned so much and feel really inspired to, be a more ethical consumer.
It's hard. It's so hard.
Yeah, it really is. But yeah, it was really, really inspiring. It was just so great to hear about your process and everything that you're doing. This was really amazing. So thank you so much for joining us. And also thank you for everyone for being here, and especially Linda Parker's husband, Mark Parker, for joining us this evening to honor her memory. And we're just really looking forward to seeing you all at our next American Indian Studies events. And Leah, looking forward to seeing you at the CISSA.
Yeah, whatever those acronyms are. And then I have to call my cousin, and I'm like, "Can you send me the link?" And she's like, "I sent it to you like 4 times." I'm like, "What? Messenger and text to email? Like, I don't know anymore. Like, COVID has got my brain."
The struggle is real.
Oh God, yeah. But thank you all for having me. It was a pleasure to be able to share my experiences with you. And again, I use my art and my work as a platform to have those hard conversations about community and environment. And anybody wants to ask more questions in private, please follow me on any of the social medias that I use. And it's a great way for me to interact and stay connected with people. Also, if anybody is in the Santa Fe or coming to Santa Fe, we do make, when the Pueblo is open, I do make visiting hours. So everybody's always welcome to come and check out the studio and our community as well.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Leah, what Pueblo
Just
is
gonna
your
ask
husband
that.
from?
Oh, my husband's from Jemez.
Jemez. Oh, excellent. And are you at SAR right now?
No, I'm actually here in Jemez. We are still on lockdown. And when I explain that to people, they're like, "Yeah, the whole country's on lockdown." I'm like, "No, I live in a sovereign nation. Like, we have a different rule. We have a whole different thing.
Right.
I'm literally on lockdown. We can leave 1 day a week for over a year." So hopefully the Pueblo opens up the end of May. They're going to reevaluate it and see, because I have projects in California that I put on hold for a year. And so I need to get back there and get to them. So yeah, I'm literally on lockdown.
Right. But you are considered the artist in residence at SAR, right? Is that, or had you been, or you currently are?
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
been, and then and because of the pandemic, we kind of put part of the project on hold. So I
Right.
came home to finish it, because it was just too, it was just
Sure.
getting crazy. And so I'm finishing up the project, and then when SAR staff is back full time, then I'll go back and kind of finish up.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a summer fellow. Like in 2006, and my wife is an academic and loved it so much I made my wife apply for a summer fellow, so she was a summer fellow about 4 years later, and it's a really stunning place, SAR.
Fabulous program. If anybody gets the opportunity to apply.
Yeah, very good. Linda, I see you about want to speak. No? Oh, okay. Oh, Mark, you're on mute. There you go.
No, this is my first Zoom meeting. Sorry.
You did fabulous as a first Zoom meeting. Kate, is there anything else we need from Leah in terms of paperwork, or are we set?
We're good to go. Everything's set.
Okay. Well, I mean, thank you so much again, and for being, so flexible with us. I appreciate that. Of course, it's a busy time of year for us, and I wish we were a little bit more on top of the communication, but I'm so glad this worked out, and it really was fantastic. And I learned so much, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, have a good rest of the night, and
All right.
we'll be in touch sometime soon.
Okay.
I'll start following you on Instagram.
There you go.
Okay. All right, take care.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.